All right, so I wanted to begin by telling you a little bit about myself. My name is April Kaull. I'm the Executive Director of Communications for University Relations here at West Virginia University, and my job is telling West Virginia University's story, our students, our faculty, staff, programs, and initiatives on our campuses in Morgantown and Beckley, Kaiser, our health sciences campuses in Charleston and Martinsburg, and beyond through Extension and our alumni. And I had a job in media for about 20 years prior to that. And prior to that, I was a student just like you at West Virginia University. So I'm going to take you sort of on the journey from student into that first professional environment with some tips that I think may be helpful to you, and definitely things that I learned along the way. So we're going to talk about how to present your best professional self. And that really begins by thinking about what professionalism means. It is definitely important, not just when it comes to a career, but really all aspects of your life as you prepare for your life after graduation. That means thinking about building a resume and a portfolio that really showcases your skills. So what do I mean by skills? Let's talk about building skills, what kind of skills you need and how to build them. You want to build skills that will make you an attractive employee after graduation. What does that mean? Well, it means focusing on you as a person and not just an employee. You want to highlight service, volunteering, the things that make you a good coworker, a good colleague. You want to showcase self-awareness, because self-awareness helps an employer know that you understand your abilities as well as your limitations, which will in turn help that employer work with you and you work with them in a constructive way once you're in a job. You also want to be sure that you're highlighting collaboration, teamwork, motivation, all of those ways that you work with others and you work within yourself by yourself to achieve tasks and to bring projects to a successful conclusion. You want to establish good habits, and you want to be doing that right now, because a habit is formed by repetition and time. So how do you go about doing that? Well, and what are the good habits you want to form? One of them is definitely timeliness. You want to be on time, if not a few minutes early, so you can be prepared, ready, and there are no issues when it is time to go. So start building that as a good habit now. Be on time for things. It shows not only that you're organized, which we'll talk about in a minute, but it's also a sign of respect for other people's time and the obligations that they may have. So it's not just about you, it's also about the other person and the other people you may be working with. Learn how to schedule and manage your schedule. This is really important because I'm sure you're extremely busy now with extracurricular activities, personal obligations, your classwork, homework. All of those things give you a great opportunity to figure out how best you manage that schedule. How do you keep track of things? What system will work best for you? Because as you move from a student into a professional environment, you'll have all of those same kinds of things pulling at your time, and you'll need to know how to organize and schedule them. So be sure that you have an effective organizational strategy, not just for your calendar, not just for your schedule, but also for your tasks, for those projects, those initiatives, those things that you're working on. You'll have short-term, medium-term, and long-term things that you're working on. How do you keep all of that organized, not only from a professional perspective, but also as it relates to that balance of work and personal life? So that's important as well. Work to develop right now good communication skills. I teach a class called Media 215, and it's a basic writing and communications course. And I always tell my students at the beginning of every semester, if you're not a journalism student, if you're not going into public relations or marketing, this is still an invaluable course for you, because you will need to learn how to be a good and effective communicator no matter what you're doing in life. And so knowing how to write properly and in a professional way, how to use good grammar so that your work looks professional and sounds professional, knowing how to put together a presentation in a professional way, how to use PowerPoint or other platforms, and understanding how to communicate in a public setting with your voice through public speaking. All of those are very important for you to develop now. So whether you're in a student organization, a church group, another nonprofit, if you talk around the dinner table with your roommates or family, all of those are great opportunities to practice those public speaking skills. And every assignment you have is an opportunity for you to develop and perfect writing, grammar, and presentation. And finally, grooming is, of course, important. Being professional in the way you look and the way you carry yourself. Standing up straight, sitting up straight, understanding how to, be in a sitting or standing professional environment. All of that's important. So be sure that you're thinking about all of those things. And when it comes to grooming, one more thing I wanted to point out very quickly, be sure you're dressing for the position and the situation. That's important because that will vary from profession to profession, job to job, and it will even change based on specific tasks or projects that you're going to be involved with. For example, there are days when I'm wearing a pair of blue jeans and a polo shirt if I'm going to be out at the WVU farm working on something. I want to dress for that environment and that occasion. But if I'm at the state capitol working with some of our state lawmakers and our government relations team, I'm obviously going to dress in a much different fashion. I might have on a suit or a dress. So keep those things in mind, because it does send a message about your ability to be prepared for that professional environment, no matter what it is. So let's talk a little bit about the transition. That transition and how that really does equal expectations on the part of your future employer. Employers want to hire self-starters. They don't want to be doing all the work. They've hired you to do that. So they're going to come to you and say, this is what we want to have done. This is what we want you to work on. Their expectation of you is going to be that you're a person who knows how to start a project, work on a project, complete a project on time and without a lot of drama, and on or under budget. So that's an expectation they're going to have. They're going to expect you to master their tools and processes. You may have a way you like to communicate. Maybe you don't like email. You don't pay attention to email very much these days. You like to do everything through text message or Snapchat or Teams. You need to be able to adapt to what your employer's preferences are. Now, that doesn't mean you can't advocate for a change and come up with a presentation, a proposal on why you believe a new or a different way may be better. But you have to understand that they may have a process or a tool in place for specific reasons. So that brings me to that point of striking the balance and learning how to strike that balance of being new, but still having that excitement of wanting to advocate for new ways of doing things. Trust me, when you're the new person in a new position and you're just starting out, you're going to want to shake things up. You're going to want to walk in and you're going to want to make suggestions. And many times your employer will have brought you into a particular position because they like that about you. They like your energy. They like the fact that you're going to bring new ideas, a new approach and perspective to their workplace. But you have to know how to navigate that gently sometimes, because there can be reasons already there why something is happening. So knowing who to speak to, going to your immediate supervisor and talking with them about why you think this might be a good idea and how to go about doing that is always a best first step when you're walking into that new environment. So as I said, when we're talking about transitions and expectations, dress for that part. These are obviously some professional examples in more of a work space that would be a traditional workspace. But as I said, you might find that you're going to be wearing much more casual clothing. So be sure you understand what your company's dress code and policy is. And as more and more people are working from home or in a hybrid capacity, those rules are shifting and changing. So it's really important to have an understanding of what their expectations are, depending on the particular position. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about personal brand. And I'm going to spend the majority of my time here on this as it relates to social media, because that's really the primary place where your personal brand is going to be solidified and developed. It is a lot more important than you may think when it comes to job prospects. Social media, according to the Education Advisory Board, well, 94% of employers use social media when it comes to candidate recruitment, 94%. And 43% of employers who used social media did not hire a person based on finding negative content. So it's really important that you are right now thinking about what your social media footprint looks like. Your behavior online definitely defines you. People know you by those tweets, those snaps. It's the only impression some people may have. So be kind, don't troll. Try to be positive overall. Don't get into arguments with people over social media. Highlight the good stuff. As we talked about, now is the time to get that internship, get some, quote unquote, real world experience, build that portfolio, build that resume, volunteer. That's good stuff. And that's what you want to be highlighting. If you post something, know it is there forever, even if you delete it. Screenshot. That's all I'm going to say. Screenshot. We've all lived it. Be sure you pick the right profile photo. Use one that really shows your face, because people engage with that. They identify with that, as opposed to, a random, animal or photo or a photo where we can't really see you. So that's really important. The little bio that you have should make sense with who you want people to understand you are. Think of it as sort of that first impression. So if it's something very abstract, it might be confusing for somebody who's not part of your inner circle. It's important to create a positive reputation for sure, but you can also have some fun, because as I talked about at the very beginning, balance is really important. They aren't just hiring an employee, they're hiring a person, and they want to know who that person is and how that person is going to fit into the rest of their team. I can tell you, having been on a number of search committees, ultimately, that is often the deciding factor between two top candidates. Who's the better fit with the existing team, and how are they going to work together? So having a good mix is really important. Develop a LinkedIn profile, update it. It is your online resume. It can really help you when it comes time for that internship application or job. Add projects, honors, and really keep it updated as part of that profile so you can make it as strong as possible. Connect with your mentors. Don't be afraid to get in touch with people you may know or who you think may be able to help you. Use the resources here at the university. Use career services. Use those resources within your college or school, friends, alumni, your family. Social media could be a good place to build some of those connections, but don't forget about those other connections that can be equally as important. And finally, I've said a lot. We've covered a great deal of territory. Some of it may have been a little bit scary, a little bit, unnerving. That's all okay. if you're a good job candidate in the first place, you can just be yourself. It's okay to have fun on social media, to show your personality and let people know who you are. You can find a lot more information, by the way, from our team about social media and using social media at social.wvu.edu. And at this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And if anyone has questions, I am more than happy to try to answer them or get you to the right person. Any questions?
Hi, I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah, so our social media like Facebook is that much important, and I can also lock my profile.
Yes, you can lock your profile. That's really up to you. Obviously, the more public your information is, the wider reach you'll have. But I also completely understand that need or want for some privacy and some protections as it relates to people being able to interact with you, comment or share on your posts. So be sure to look at those individual platforms, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat, LinkedIn, and see what parameters they allow. And you can often tweak your personal settings so that they better align with what you're comfortable with.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon. Are you able to hear me?
I am.
Hi. So thank you so much for the great presentation. I learned a great bit from that. I just had a couple of questions, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So the first question I have is about the image that I will use to show myself. Do you think it's recommended against or recommended for to just use the same image across everything in like professional media?
That's a great question. So I think that I will tell you for myself, I tend to be more consistent, but something to keep in mind is different platforms, the image that you have is going to show up a little bit differently because of the size and space. So for example, on Twitter, the photo, is sort of a round, it's a different size and shape. So the photo that you're using, you might have to adjust just a little bit versus the one that you use on Facebook. My suggestion would be that they should all be at least similar in that they all should show your face, focus in that area. I might also suggest that for a LinkedIn profile, for example, if there's a particular skill, and I'm going to use this as an example, if you were aspiring to be a photographer, for LinkedIn, I might try to use a photo that showcases you with your camera taking a photo, because it serves to reinforce this is my skill, this is my area of expertise, and what I'm aspiring to be professionally. Whereas on Twitter or Snapchat or Instagram, you might be able to not do that. So that's something that you may want to consider.
Okay, so what I was thinking was that since I use so I don't use too much social media, but for the ones I use, they're pretty much private with a small group of friends. And so I was thinking for that, I don't think I'm going to be using that as like a communicator tool in like the professional world. So I was going to keep, whatever profile picture I have, just, the same, like if it's, let's say a profile picture with me with a cat, something like that would stay the same. But for more professional media like LinkedIn and whatever other thing, like even, Zoom profile picture is something that should be recommended, then would it just be okay to keep the same profile picture for the professional media?
I think so, as long as it's not, a really goofy picture of you and your cat. If it's a, sort of typical, you're holding your cat, I think that's perfectly fine. If it's, like you being really crazy with your cat, probably not quite as much for a professional environment.
Oh yeah, the cat would just be like, my Twitter profile picture, but for like LinkedIn, it would be like a professional snapshot that I would just kind of.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The second question I had was, so with the, pandemic and all of that, one of the biggest uh, changes is professional demeanor on Zoom. And so that's something I personally don't know a lot about. And I often find myself asking other people about, like, what are those unwritten rules that you shouldn't be doing on Zoom? Like, for example, right now I have my camera off, but that's because I'm having technical difficulties. But do you have
Sure.
any like comments about, like, do's and don'ts, and like the big meetings on Zooms and then the small meetings on Zoom, stuff like that?
Another good question. So I think that partly, especially once you're in a company, I think you need to understand what their expectations are of employees when working in a virtual space. So I think that's first and foremost, because different companies may have some different rules about whether they require employees to have their cameras on for the entirety of a meeting or not, whether they want people to be muted or not, how they want people to use some of the reactions, to raise their hand or, respond to comments, questions, things like that. So there's a little bit of that etiquette that may be specific to an employer. In general, though, I would say the most important thing is to remain engaged and give that meeting or that space your full attention, just as you would if you were in that meeting or in that space in person. Because if you don't, then it's a sign of, it can be construed as a sign of disrespect, that you're not engaged. And also, especially as we're in a hybrid environment where there may actually be a meeting taking place where some people are physically in the room, but there are also people who are joining virtually, that it creates a dynamic within that meeting that can be not very productive. So if everybody remains engaged with their cameras on, one thing that you might do is, if, for example, you're having a technical issue and you're not able to have your camera on, in the chat at the very beginning of the meeting when you log on, say, I'm logged in. Unfortunately, I'm experiencing some technical problems, so I don't have my camera on right now, or I've turned my video off. That way, you've alerted the other people in that meeting that you're there, you're engaged, but you're experiencing an issue. Just that transparency and awareness can be really important.
Okay, that's a great answer. That helps a lot. I don't want to, I've been in the situation before, and it was only a orientation, a smaller orientation for my college, but it was like, I don't know what's a do or don'ts. So let's say, like, let's say if there's no do or don'ts that are specified, let's say, for example, it's like a job interview, and there's three individuals that are interviewing me, and they haven't mentioned anything. Of course, I'll have my camera on, but are there any recommendations on etiquettes in that situation when I really don't know what's right or wrong?
I would always default to having your camera on, being on mute when I'm not speaking, and being visibly engaged in the moment. Don't be distracted looking at something else, doing something else, playing with the cat, for example. Obviously, we have tons of examples, and my cat does it as well, where they'll decide they want to walk across the keyboard, and you can't control, some of those things. I would certainly say, if you're, for example, going to be doing, a job interview, or if you're in a professional meeting, if you have the ability to, move an animal out of the room where you are and close the door, that's a proactive way to sort of take that distraction out of the mix. But that's the most important thing, is that even though you may have that screen barrier, you don't create additional barriers to your participation and their perception of you being a part and in the moment. You really want to be present so that you can be fully engaged.
Okay. What about things like, let's say I have like a water bottle next to me and I have my camera on. Do you think it's typically just I want to ask before, like, do you mind if I, drink uh, some water, or do you think like in that situation I can just turn my camera off quickly, drink the water, and then turn it back on?
I don't think you have to. I might mute, so that we don't hear the sound of you drinking.
Right.
But I would not be, if you were in a meeting and you needed to take a sip of water, you'd take a sip of water out of your bottle. So
Right.
kind of, put your, would I do that if I was just sitting around a table in a room? If you would just do that, then I would just do that. Now, I will
Right.
say, if your water bottle has some sort of like logo or something on it, you want to be cognizant of what message that might be sending.
Sure.
I, for example, have this very large red, cup that is just outside of the screenshot, so that if I would start to cough or have an issue, I have it nearby, but it's not in the camera shot as a visual distraction for anyone else. And I certainly, wouldn't have something that had, sort of, a naked person on it or something like that as a logo if I
Right.
was in a professional situation.
Okay. Thank you so much for spending the time to answer those questions. That's very helpful.
Mhm.
I do have a question.
Sure.
First of all, thank you for your presentation. I really enjoyed it. So as we know, during this pandemic, a lot of work has shifted to being done remotely. And I've heard of employers giving their employees the choice recently to either work remotely or continue going into the office. Do you have any thoughts about whether or not working remotely puts employees at a disadvantage in terms of getting ahead? Like, is that FaceTime super important to go in physically to the office?
I think that depends on a few factors. And I'm going to speak from sort of my perspective on this. I think it depends, number one, on the kind of work it is, and what the culture of that company or that business is to begin with. If they're a company that has long had a variety of work environments, remote, hybrid, in person, then it's probably not going to be a big deal because the other employees are going to be used to that. The management setup is going to be one that is conducive to sort of equal treatment among different work situations. If it's a company that has made this transition either temporarily or moving forward as a result of the pandemic, it might be a little new for them. And they may be finding their way through what those human resources issues are between different employees who are, in person all the time, employees who come and go out of the workspace, and those who are working in a truly remote setting. So keep that in mind first. Is this a company that has an established history of various work types, or is this something new? And then number two, I think it depends on you as a person in part. Are you someone who traditionally does better when you are in person with people? Do you feed off other people's personal energy? Are you more of a creative collaborator in space? When you get together with people, do you find ideas kind of popping, or do you work better, sort of on your own as a self-motivator, self-starter? So I think that also plays a big role in the ultimate success of someone working remotely versus being in person or hybrid.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, it sounds like that may be all the questions for now. So I will go ahead and move forward with the second part of this presentation. You should all be able to see my screen. I often make the mistake of forgetting to share it. So I just want to make sure it looks like it's sharing. So I think we're good. April, that was a wonderful talk and I really enjoyed listening to it. And I recognize your voice, though I didn't recognize your face because I know I hear your voice often through the WVU News. So I really enjoyed that. And I want to thank all of you for being here. I have a very different background and position than April. So we'll have some different perspectives and things that we'll talk about, but there's definitely some overlap. So my background is actually, I'm a basic scientist. And so I trained in the laboratory. I have my biology and chemistry degree. And then I went on and got my doctorate in pharmaceutical sciences. And I went through the traditional postdoctoral fellow track. And then I went on to work in academics as a faculty member and kind of spent my time teaching quite a bit, doing the teaching, research, and service piece. I'm actually from Texas, and we moved here about 8 years ago. And in moving here, I really took on more administrative and managerial roles. Now I'm the Assistant Vice President for Graduate Education at the Health Sciences Center. And in that role, I oversee all of our graduate programs, and I work very closely with our biomedical sciences programs. And out of these programs, we are training students to go out and become scientists, and those students will go into a variety of careers. And oftentimes when people think about graduate school, they really just think about academics. And we have many students that go into industry, that want to go into science communication, that go into government jobs. And so there's a lot of opportunity there. And we spend a lot of time talking about these types of things. And so I think this is a great time for you to start talking about these things, because it's not often that we address professionalism in the classroom. And I did want to mention that I turned my camera off just earlier to take a drink. And I appreciate your question, because I thought, oh, I think I'll turn my camera off. And sometimes, this is all new for a lot of us and we're not quite sure. So I just wanted to comment on that. It's totally personal preference. And as April said, it depends on what would you do in person in the meeting, right? And so this is about being professional, and it's not about being perfect. And we are all going to do things that we look back and think, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that. That's okay. I think it's just doing the best you can, learning what you can, paying attention. And I think the best way to learn professionalism is to watch. That's where I've learned so much, is watching people that I admire, that I work with, watching their different styles and approaches. And so for you to pay attention to people that you know or you're familiar with that are in the industry or the area that you're interested in going into, that's a nice way to learn these things beyond these presentations. And so April cited a study, and I wanted to mention another one. There's this study on career readiness was conducted by the National Association of Colleges and Employers, and they asked employers which professional competencies were essential to workplace success. And it wasn't about the technical skills. It wasn't about the hard skills. They really talked about the essential nature of professionalism and work ethic. 97.5% of them commented on that. And then we know when we talk about just thinking about the impressions that we make, people will form an opinion of you within 7 seconds. Whether that's fair or not is another question, right? But that's kind of the nature of human beings. It could be we meet in person and we form that opinion. We have a chance to have a conversation. That's great. It could be that we meet via social media and I just see one of your posts, right? And so we'll get into that a little bit more too. But you have a short period of time to make that first impression. And again, in thinking about that, a study that was done actually very long ago by Harvard University, Carnegie Foundation, and Stanford Research Center, when they asked about job success in the workplace. Again, they said that they really found 85% of workplace success is attributed to what's often called soft skills. And I don't love that term. I was told by someone that I really admire their essential skills. And this is exactly the reason why, is they're not things we often learn in a classroom, but they're really important to job success. And so April spent a good amount of time talking about your professional image. And so I don't want to really be redundant there. And I just want to really reinforce what she said. And I work with a lot of students and faculty, right? And many of them use social media. And, you know, we never want to censor each other. We have our First Amendment rights. Certainly that's there. I just think it's really important for you to take that point of, you know, what you put out there it is going to be seen, and it's not always private when you think it is. And, you know, at the university, we're not going to do anything, but your future employers, they'll see that as a representation of you. If you talk this way on social media, is that how you treat colleagues, or you're in the classroom, or you're in the workplace? So it's really just take a minute, don't respond emotionally to things, and just really think about it. And certainly make sure your settings are private if you really want it to be a real, truly personal type thing. And so I won't go on more about that. I will talk about some specifics as it relates to professionalism. These are definitely relevant to you now as students, and if you were to continue into graduate school or into the workplace, certainly be prepared. Many of these sound very simple, but I think as I've gone through my career, I've learned more and more the importance of preparation. I think I would over prepare in the beginning. Then I went through a phase where I thought, oh, I can wing it. I'm fine winging it. Now I'm back to, no, it's really important not only to be on time or early, but be prepared, right, for what you plan to do. Because again, you have that 7 seconds to make that first impression. And if you come in rambling or unprepared, that's a missed opportunity for sure. Follow through. When you say you're going to do something, follow through. Again, this is pretty straightforward, but what often happens to us is we say we'll do something. We say yes to something, and we add more things on our plate than maybe what we have time for. And either we break our back trying to follow through on everything, or we can't follow through. And so what I'll tell you is you need to do what you say you're going to do, but be cautious of what extra things you take on so you don't put yourself in a bind, because it will reflect poorly if you're not able to follow through. And so just maybe ask for additional time up front. Say, I have a lot going on this week. Would it be okay if we did this the next week, right? If you're in the position to ask that, it's a gift to yourself in advance to just ask for that extra time. The other thing, as April mentioned, be early or on time at the very least. And definitely when I think about, for instance, presentations, if I showed up right at 2:29, I got on. What if my camera didn't work? What if the technology had a problem, right? That has happened. It does happen. And so that's one reason to be on time. And definitely, as she said, respecting others' time. You may not realize it, but if you put yourself in their shoes, the other people in the room are there waiting on you, thinking, oh, I could be doing something else, like they're right. And so just remembering that usually that you being late does have a ripple effect, and it does impact other people. And I talked to some of our faculty and said, what are some things that you would want to share with potential graduate students about professionalism that you face? And one of them said, remind them that there's no penalties for being early as far as turning things in. Oftentimes, you know, we have a deadline and we work until the last minute, and sometimes we go beyond the last minute, and then we want to submit a paper, and then that disrupts the faculty's grading deadline. Or if we want feedback before we submit an essay or a personal statement for an application, we need to give them the extra time to review it. And so there's a lot of different areas where this is applicable. The other piece is own your mistakes. No one knows everything. We should not expect someone to know everything. What you don't want to do is pretend that you do, right? We all make mistakes. Own them. You're human. We're all human. And that's okay. Be comfortable in who you are, comfortable enough to say, that was a mistake. and then explain what happened, or just say that was a mistake, it will not happen again, or that was a lesson learned, right? That's what I'll say, lesson learned. I always turn those, whatever sometimes negative experiences we have, I always look at them as a lesson learned, and ask questions. And I love that you all have been asking questions. I mean, this is how we really engage. This is how we learn from each other. And as you're thinking about your career, you're thinking about, going on interviews, you do want to have some questions, and you want to have questions that you really want to know. And, there's lists of questions out there that you can have, but it really does show that you've given thought, that you have options, that you really care about the fit of this job or this program for you by asking particular questions. And don't be afraid of doing that, of asking the questions. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about email. This is an interesting situation. First of all, check your email. I know many of you, this is not your preferred means of communication. I will say that for faculty, employers, right, this is really still the primary mode of communicating important information. And it's very often still working with our students. We share a lot of information by email. It can be a little bit overwhelming or a lot overwhelming, but that really is where the key information comes through, right? And you need to be checking that email every day. And for instance, if you're working for somebody, you need to understand what their expectations are. It's probably checking it much more frequently than just once a day. You need to put that at the top of your priority list, and not at the bottom of the list in many cases, because that's where important information is going to come through. Another thing, in thinking about the way what you write in the substance of your own email, be sure to have a professional greeting in the email. If you have a personal, very close, casual, comfortable relationship with someone, that's very different. But if we're talking about in the work setting, or if we're talking about applying for medical school or graduate school, right, you're communicating with people that are determining whether you will be a professional in that field. So think about addressing them with a greeting, usually dear so-and-so, or even hi, but avoid hey or what's up, right? Or even like some people don't even have a greeting, right? It's just, here's the message and that's it. You want to have a sign off and you want to have a greeting there. Remember that in emails, it is so often that things can be misinterpreted and misunderstood, especially when we try to insert humor, or maybe some people that have some sarcastic humor. It doesn't come across well. And there can be a lot of interesting situations that arise due to just trying to be funny in email. So just be careful of what you're trying to convey. And remember, on the other side of that email, they may not understand it. They don't get to see your face, right? They don't get to see the expression you make whenever you make that comment. And also, never respond in the heat of a moment. If you're upset about something, take a little bit of time to calm down, because you can recall an email, but it's not that easy. And so just like many other things, once a person opens it, they have the email. And so you just want to be careful, because it's a permanent document there. So really think about what you're putting in writing, whether we're talking on social media or we're talking about email. Also, when you jump into the email, don't assume the person knows exactly what you're talking about, because oftentimes you're emailing faculty, or again, employers who may be getting in a lot of other applications. And so you do need to give brief context or background, just something to keep in mind. Never assume anything. And this is one particular example of something not to assume. And then this idea of follow-up. So this came up when often students will ask for letters of support or recommendation for jobs, or applying to professional programs, things like this. And that is that's great. And as faculty, that's what we do. We provide those letters. And sometimes we may forget. So we do want you to follow up, right? We should remember, but it's good to follow up. But be reasonable in your time frame. I had one faculty member tell me they emailed her on Friday afternoon. They emailed her on Saturday. They emailed her on Sunday, just checking in. And so they actually emailed her. She said it ended up being 3 times in 5 days, 2 of those days being the weekend. And so it became a little bit where she felt it was a little bit badgering her. And so be sure to ask in advance so there is enough time, and just be respectful with your follow-up, and just think about, would you want someone continually like poking you, right? She probably, or he has it on their list. And so it's certainly fine to check in, but just don't be too eager and do it too frequently. And then just looking at your email, again, with a greeting. We talked about dear so-and-so. This came up, a couple of faculty members mentioned this to me, and I think it can be confusing for students often in knowing how to address people. My best advice to you is to pay attention to, first of all, if you have a return email, look to see how they sign their name. If they have an email signature and they didn't say like Julie, but maybe it says Dr. Lockman, usually that's a sign that's kind of what they prefer to be addressed, right? And so it's usually safe in the academic setting with your faculty to say dear professor, right? Because that kind of covers the bases. In other settings, really, one of our faculty said, I don't care if they call me by my first name, but it's nice for them to call me something. He said sometimes he'll just get those notes and it's a one-liner, I need to ask you this, and there's no hello or goodbye, right? So dear so-and-so. Also, just a little bit of insight. When you get into the workforce, this becomes very important. The use of, there's 3 lines in an email, right? You can send to somebody, you can send it as a carbon copy to somebody and a blind carbon copy to somebody. So the CC is meant to be an FYI. The people that you CC on that email, you put them on there because you want them to be aware, in the loop. Maybe they asked you to follow up with this person. So it's just an FYI. They are not expected to respond. So the same is true of you if you're on a CC, unless you are directly asked something in the email. Remember, there's always the blind carbon copy on there, okay? And so we don't necessarily know if someone also included other people on an email. And again, when you get into work situations, this becomes important, and it's not always very straightforward. So just understanding, when do I reply all, right? When do I just reply directly to the person? A lot of times those are things you need to figure out within the company culture. Different bosses kind of prefer different things. Some people like reply all because they feel it's like complete transparency. Some people realize, well, that really can dominate a lot of people's inbox by replying to all the time. And so they really want to keep it pared back just between 2 people, and then you loop everyone back in the end. So these are just some of the different things as it relates to professionalism that I see come up, not only with students, but honestly with faculty and staff, and managing kind of email in the work setting. Some other things that I just want to mention to you, really important, be kind and collegial to everyone. First of all, it can be self-serving because you never know who's going to be giving you a job one day, who will be providing you a recommendation someday. But honestly, right, we're all in this together. We should be respectful. And one sign that I know myself and many colleagues watch for when we're interviewing people is how they treat the staff, how they treat the administrative assistants. Things like that tells you a lot about that person, and that they respect everyone regardless of their position. So do keep that in mind. That's really important. Building relationships, the relationships you build along the way can serve you well. And so be sure to build those relationships, network as, professionally. That's really important. And socially, LinkedIn is a great platform to network on. Demonstrate integrity, and that's just being accountable for your work and your actions while behaving ethically at all times. Really, again, if you make a mistake, you own it. You don't blame somebody else, right? And if it was somebody else, you find a graceful way to manage that, right? And then developing self-awareness, which I know April mentioned. And this is really about understanding yourself, your responses to things, being able to manage your emotional responses to things. And there's a lot of different ways you can kind of learn about through self-awareness, the Myers-Briggs assessment, strengths finders. There's a lot of assessments that you can utilize to do that. But I think taking the time just to reflect on your own experiences and the way you've responded to things can be helpful. And I wouldn't want to leave this out, and because my focus is more on graduate education. When you're applying to a job or to graduate school or professional school, do not send a generic application to everyone. There oftentimes we'll get an application and the personal statement will say the wrong institution. Sometimes the reference letter has the wrong name, right? Because everyone's very busy, right? And we want to get all these things out the door. But if you put the wrong name of the institution in the cover letter or the, I guess, personal statement that you submitted, that just doesn't reflect well and just showed you didn't take the time. Maybe this institution wasn't important enough to you. And so you didn't take the time to say West Virginia University. You just reuse something you used somewhere else. That was something our admissions committee members had mentioned to me. And also, when you're applying and interviewing, never imply that one school or another is better than the other. Sometimes we'll get students who are like, well, I really want to go to so-and-so and so-and-so, but I'm settling. I think I just hope I just want to go here, right? So WVU is a wonderful, outstanding institution, right? We should be proud to be here. And the same is true of so many other institutions. So be aware of how you're speaking about a place that people are working and building and really doing research and teaching and doing community work, right? Those are things to really keep in mind. And let's see, there are just a couple more things I think that often aren't understood. If you are asked to RSVP, traditionally, that actually means that you acknowledge whether you are attending or whether you are not attending. It's not just whether you are attending, okay? Now, I will say today, for instance, for this workshop, if you signed up, I doubt there was an option for you to say, no, you will not attend. I could be wrong. So in this situation, you would RSVP and you would show up. And you should always show up if you RSVP. If you can't make it, email the people and let them know. And that's really something important. It comes up a lot, and I think it's often misunderstood. And as we're coming up toward the end of time, I wanted to mention a couple of other things. I wanted to talk about how our posture and our presentation can really impact how we're seen professionally. And I want you just to look at this picture and think about if you were sitting at a desk across the room, just think about the different impressions you get of this woman who's the same person in different positions. And imagine she's waiting in the waiting room to go in for a job interview, right? First of all, her posture gives an impression to the person who'll be interviewing her. It also is going to impact how she herself feels going into that interview. And we know there have been some really interesting studies on posture, how we hold ourselves, our body language, and how that makes us feel. And if we're in a position where we feel confident and powerful, we are more likely to really go in and do a good job. And so if you look at this picture here, it shows you that on the bottom, individuals who feel powerlessness, maybe nervousness, you tend to shrink in your body language. And so people that know this can they see this in you. The people on the top, they're a little bit more powerful in their stances and they've expanded. So this is interesting because I would never tell you to be something you're not, because I believe in being yourself and being authentic in who you are. But at the same time, I think it's important to realize how some of these little things can change the way we feel inside and then can impact how we actually go into a situation. And so I would refer you to the Amy Cuddy TED Talk, that is Your Body Language May Shape Who You Are. If you want to learn a little bit more about that, there's a lot of research that's gone into this, and I think it's really interesting. It may not work for everyone, but I think it's something to really think about. And lastly, I want to mention about nerves. We all get nervous. It just depends on what situation you're in. And so one thing that's recommended when you think about being nervous, so this is, we would say, let's say it's stage fright. We're going for an interview. We're really nervous. We have stage fright, if you will. If you can find a way, instead of just say, calm down, harness that energy into excitement. Okay, if you can tell yourself, okay, I'm just excited about this. Try to flip that switch in your mind away from, oh my gosh, I'm really nervous, I'm going to do well, to, gosh, this is really important to me. I'm excited. I'm going to conquer this. Okay, these are called little nudges that we can do to try to help ourselves power through and really hopefully dominate in certain situations. So that's kind of what I wanted to finish up with you all, of these different concepts to think about of and helping yourself and presenting yourself in different situations. And we're close to the end on time, but I'm happy to answer any questions for you. Or if you have others for April, feel free, she's still on here.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. I mean, it can go to either one of you. In the past presentation, you kind of highlighted the importance of soft skills. And I just wanted to ask, how do you think would be a good way of demonstrating some of your soft skills at like a job interview, or when you're talking to someone of higher up? How would be a good way of kind of demonstrating the soft skills?
Julie, I'm going to defer to you.
Okay. That's a good question. And so there are many different types of soft skills. And so I think people that have had experience, certainly in managing people in situations, that's something to highlight. Soft skills can also be about building relationships and building teams. And so I think if you can highlight something like that, the role that you played within a team, that's another thing. And it's often a question that is asked. If you're in a team, which role do you play? Are you the leader? Are you the follower? Right. And so I think thinking about yourself in the context of a team, building a team, being a team player, those types of things. I'm trying to think of what else. Do you have other thoughts, April, on?
The only other thing I can think of is that, you know, if there are places where you can show where you have given, you know, volunteer time as part of, you know, a project where you've gone above and beyond, you know, to show that you're willing to make an investment of your time and of your effort beyond what maybe the basic expectation might be. I think that can be a powerful driver in an interview and show an employer that you're someone they could depend on and someone who would, you know, be an asset to them. It also shows, you know, altruism and you know, sort of a good-natured, you know, kindness, which can be a real benefit in a lot of work environments.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for the great answers.
Hi, so thank you for that presentation. I have a few more questions for that presentation, if you guys don't mind. So the first question I have is about emails. So one thing that I've been struggling with is figuring out like time etiquette with emails. For example, let's say, you know, I'm up late and I have to write this email. It's time sensitive. Let's say it's like 12:30 a.m. So is there, you know, something looked down upon for emailing that late, or is it generally not a big deal since the receiver is going to check it in, you know, the morning anyway?
I can tell you that, I mean, I receive emails in the middle of the night from like my boss because she can't sleep. And so my email alerts are not on. So it's kind of up to us to make sure our emails are not chiming in the middle of the night. And so my personal opinion is that's fine. In the position you're in, I don't see anything wrong with that. I would, as long as you're not expecting a response by 8 a.m. or 10 a.m., right? Be reasonable with when you expect a response back from them. But I don't see an issue with you sending it then. Oh, you're on mute, April.
Remember the mute button. One other thing I would also suggest is, depending on what email client you're using, you might also check to see if you can draft your email and then set it to send at a later time or date. So there are a lot of email clients that will allow you to draft your message and then schedule it to be sent at a different time and date. And so that might allow you, for your own schedule, to, move something off your to-do list, but take out that uncertainty of whether you're, setting up an expectation for that other person to feel like they have to respond on your timeline.
That's good advice. And when I use that feature is when I see that someone's out of the office or on vacation and I really want to email them, but I don't want to bother them. So I will schedule it like for a day before, like the day before they come back. And so it stays at the top of their inbox as well. It doesn't get lost in the inbox and it doesn't disrupt their vacation. So that's a good idea. I know Outlook offers that feature. That's what I use.
Okay, very interesting. I didn't know about these things, but you learn something new every day. So I had another question about emails, and this is about carbon copy or CC in emails. So there'd be some times where I might be emailing, like let's say someone and a other individual's name is mentioned. Let me give you a specific example. Let's say I email a professor and the professor gives me contact details of someone else in the email. And so what I've done before is I've kind of, CC'd that professor in an email that I'm going to be sending to the other individual, just to kind of like let the receiver know, hey, they're aware that I'm sending you this email. They referred me to you, and I would also write that out. Are things like that okay too? I don't want to bother people and flood their inbox, but
I think that's a very mature way of going about it in a very professional way. And it keeps that communication open. So, and it closes the loop for them. So that professor sees, okay, he got connected or she got connected and that's done. So I do think that's a really smart way to go about it.
okay. That's really helpful, because sometimes I felt like, am I making them frustrated that I'm flooding their inbox with just emails that they
don't flood it, but
right.
and ask, and if they tell you, right, some people, I mean, these opinions differ about these things, and so you could certainly ask if it is something you're really concerned about.
Okay, because typically what happens is that I might CC the initial correspondent, and then the receiver will reply all, and so it's just going to be a back and forth, and they're going to keep receiving the emails because it's a reply all back and forth. So that's what I was kind of referring to. So another question I have.
Take
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Just be really think about when to take them off the reply all. I think, and
Okay.
that you want to do that. I appreciate your point. You don't want that cycle of reply all to keep going, because we've all been there. And
right.
So that's good that you're thinking about that and being cautious about that.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And the last question I have, again, about emails is generally for me, what I've been doing is for my emails to someone that I've never had any communication with prior. Let's say I got their email from the internet, or someone else gave it to me, to contact them about a question like a research opportunity or a job opportunity. Typically, I just go with the standard, this is my name, this is why I'm emailing you, and then, a line break, and then I talk more about the situation. But as far as the subject headers goes, I usually have a lot of trouble with that. And sometimes I include my name in the subject header just to help myself stand out. That way, if it's like a generic subject header about like, let's say letter of recommendation, but then I'll do hyphen my name. Do you guys have any recommendations about subject headers? Because I'm always just confused about that.
I think I had that on the slide and I didn't mention it, but subject headers, you want to be specific. What you're describing, I think, is great. Letter of recommendation and your name, because you want to make it easy to find for the person, something they can go back and search for if they need to search their inbox. So, but be specific. I think that's really important, because a lot of times we get generic emails like, you know, the subject, and then it's hard to really go back and track them down, especially if I don't have a lot of emails from this person and I don't know what their email address is if I'm trying to find it. So that's the key thing, I think, is just be very specific in that, and just think about always put yourself in the other shoes. That's what I always try to think. Okay, let me imagine if I'm the recipient, you know, is this going to be, how is this going to be received based upon how I address them, the subject line, how I signed off, those types of things. Just, it's sometimes we forget, we just look through our own lens. And so I think it's helpful just to kind of try to look through both sides as you're making these decisions. And it's not life and death, right? It's not about saving life. So we all make mistakes and everyone has different preferences. So I think you're doing a good job with what you're describing.
All right. Well, thank you so much for both of you guys taking the time to answer my question. Really appreciate it.
Anybody else? Okay.
I just want to say thank you so much for everyone and for the wonderful questions. And Julie, I loved your presentation. I'm so glad you focused so much on email, because you're very right. Email is a huge part of a professional work. And so thank you for focusing on that.
Well, I had a great time. Thank you all for being here, and best of luck to you in your future.
And don't forget, if you need help or assistance, Career Services is always here to provide guidance and support and service. So I know Danica would say, please don't hesitate to reach out to them in their office for anything that you might need.
Thank you so much. So well said.